Welcome to Sneak Preview. I'm your host, James McGrath Morris. This program is produced by New Mexico Writers, a not-for-profit organization committed to supporting and connecting the literary community in the Land of Enchantment. Here, authors, poets, playwrights, and others have agreed to share with us work that has not yet been published. In other words, a sneak preview. With us today is Hampton Sides, best known for his gripping narrative nonfiction work. He's an acclaimed journalist and author of best-selling histories such as Ghost Soldiers, Blood and Thunder, Hellhound on His Trail, In the Kingdom of Ice, and most recently, On Desperate Ground. It's wonderful to welcome Hampton, a strong supporter of New Mexico Writers Dinner and Organization, to Sneak Preview. Hampton, what have you brought for us?
Well, it's, first of all, just great to see you, Jamie, and so glad you're doing this. I think it's a great treat for everyone. And I think it's really an interesting thing for writers to try to share a little tidbits from a work in progress. I think often it's not only entertaining for the listener, but we writers are sometimes working through trying to unsnarl various pieces of fishing line in our stories, and that's certainly what I'm bringing you today, which is this is kind of well, first of all, I should say I'm working pretty deep into a book about the third and final voyage of Captain James Cook, the British navigator, and the one where he ultimately dies in Hawaii. But I stumbled across this really interesting sort of a story within the story, which is that on his second voyage, Captain Cook's ships brought back this Polynesian man, this young Polynesian man, who became the very first Polynesian to visit England. He lived in London for 2 years. He was the toast of the town. He met the king. He met all the best writers and thinkers and was painted by the best portraitists. And his name was Mai. He then was returned to Polynesia, to Tahiti, on Captain Cook's third voyage. So it's a story about, kind of cross-cultural transplantation and a lot of assumptions that kind of underlay that that voyage. England was trying to impress him. England also wanted to show him off to the world as the noble savage, as they called it. And it's a really interesting little story within the story. And I've decided to develop it as a long-form digital magazine piece as well. So I'm going to read the opening section from that piece. It's called The Portrait. And the larger story is known as, I think I'm calling it, The Ghost of Mai. M-A-I, Mai is our protagonist. So, The Portrait. Here we go. In 2001, at an auction at Sotheby's in London, an international art dealer named Guy Morrison purchased an oil-on-canvas portrait for the princely sum of 10.3 million pounds, one of the highest prices ever fetched for a work by an English painter. In the painting, we see a handsome, barefoot young man from Tahiti, garbed in a flowing robe, standing before a tropical Arcadian landscape. The man appears to be in his early 20s, strapping but fine-boned, his copper skin seemingly illuminated from within. His head is wrapped in a white turban. His hands are ornately tattooed, and he projects a confident, regal bearing. Reynolds captured the young man in a classical I think you pronounce this ad lucutio pose, as though he were in the middle of an oration. He appears to be a member of the South Seas aristocracy, a man of distinction, affluence, and taste, gesturing grandly as he addresses a crowd of his island subjects. This young man, whose actual name was Mai, was the first South Seas islander ever to visit England. He arrived from Tahiti in 1774 as part of the second voyage of the celebrated navigator James Cook, and stayed in Britain for 2 years. It was a cross-hemispheric anthropology experiment that in many ways succeeded, but one that was also tinged with tragedy. In London, Mai became a sensation, the star of the press, the darling of the intelligentsia, the subject of poems and later books and musical plays, and a curiosity some of the country's finest artists sought to paint. It's doubtful whether any other non-European figure had inspired English portraitists to put so much oil on canvas. Morrison, the dealer at Sotheby's in 2001, was believed to be bidding on portrait of Omai at the behest of John Magnier, a fabulously wealthy Irishman, long known for cultivating some of the world's finest lines of thoroughbred racehorses, which is the other reason why I wanted to read. Today happens to be the day of the Kentucky Derby, so seemed appropriate. In 2018, the dapper, secretive tycoon, John Magnier, reportedly had a fortune valued at 2.3 billion euros. His art collection includes at least one Modigliani and many masterpieces of equestrian art. Why was Magnier so captivated by this painting of a Polynesian man from the 1770s? What did the discerning bloodstock aficionado see in Reynolds' work? It's difficult to know because Magnier has a long history of keeping mum about his investments. His business motto, taken from James Joyce, is silence, exile, and cunning. But Portrait of Omai is regarded as a national treasure of Britain, a portrait of English significance by an English artist, as one account put it, an asset many people in the London art world believe should forever remain in England, and certainly one that should not be owned by an Irish breeder of horse racing studs. The late Joseph Burke, a prominent British art historian, wrote that in the painting, quote, the classical and the romantic tendencies of the 18th century are fused in perfect reconciliation, so the picture becomes a kind of summation. A few years after the sale, the British government, viewing the painting as a work of critical cultural heritage, slapped an export license deferral on it. By then, it had swelled in value to about 12.5 million pounds, and further steps were taken to raise the capital necessary to keep Portrait of Omai on English shores. A wealthy anonymous donor to London's Tate Britain Museum stepped forward to commit whatever sum Magnier might require. Reportedly, the mogul has so far shown no interest in selling, and the portrait, having been denied an export license, is said to be in storage. It turns out the story of the painting is much like the story of the young man who is its subject. Both are tales of grandiosity, deceit, empire, and cultural assumption. To be sure, Portrait of Omai has an undeniable majesty. The work brilliantly showcases Reynolds' mastery of technique, yet there is much that is false about the painting. The man Reynolds immortalized on canvas was not quite the man who stood before him. Back in Tahiti, a Stone Age society with a highly stratified system of social classes, Mai was a manahune, a commoner, powerless and impoverished. Certainly he would never have been seen in clothes like that. The ankle-length getup that Reynolds dressed him in resembled a toga that a Roman senator might have worn to the forum. There was nothing regal or patrician about Mai. He was just a nobody who happened to hitch an epic ride to England, a regular guy who went on a most excellent adventure, all of which makes his story even more spectacular. Part of Britain's misinterpretation of Mai was his own doing. He could tell that Britain was itself a place with a rigid social hierarchy, so he did nothing to dispel the notion that he was a person of wealth and consequence back home. Mai had allowed himself to be drawn into a new world to which he neither belonged nor comprehended, wrote Richard Connaughton in a biography of the Tahitian. Though a willing participant, Mai would also become a victim, or as Connaughton put it, the foremost casualty of a social experiment that paid scant regard to its consequences. In preparation for painting Portrait of Omai, Joshua Reynolds dashed off two informal studies which perhaps came closer to capturing the true spirit of Mai. In one of the sketches, an oval oil on canvas housed in a special collection at the Yale University Art Gallery, we see a sensitive young man with a vaguely feminine face. And it is true that some accounts hint at Mai's androgynous qualities. In the study, Mai is pensive, brooding, eyes gazing downward, lips turned into a scowl, as though he were a man uncertain about his future or dissatisfied with his lot. In the other of Reynolds' studies, this one, a pencil sketch archived in the National Library of Australia, we see something more like boldness, insouciance, with a rough edge. The young man's hair is tousled and long. A quiet defiance seems to simmer beneath his visage. This is not a prince. This is a dissident spirit and a warrior. So that's how it opens.
I mean, it feels like we snuck into a Hollywood lot and got to see a movie being made. Really, really terrific, Hampton.
It does have cinematic quality. It really does. This guy's life is just unbelievable and larger than life. And I think dying to be told by someone at some point soon. So we'll see. Maybe it will.
Thank you. Thank you, Hampton. Tune in again soon for another installment of Sneak Preview, or even better, subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more about New Mexico writers, visit our website, nmwriters.org.